Now, it's also been suggested again by some in evidence that mixed-sex civil partnerships are an attack on the institution of marriage. Now, I know that people feel very strongly about the importance of marriage, but I also know that people feel very strongly about the importance of being able to enter a civil partnership. We know from the evidence received by the lead committee on this bill that some people would prefer a mixed-sex civil partnership because they don't see marriage as fitting their beliefs.
Well, the Scottish Government's in the process of bringing in civil partnerships for heterosexual couples. Now, apparently some people claim that this is going to undermine marriage. Yes, I agree. But those people are not represented in this debate in the Scottish Parliament at all. But it is actually a fact that civil partnerships for heterosexual couples will diminish and relativise marriage. Just to clarify at the start, what's the difference between a civil partnership and a marriage? There's only two differences, really. One difference is, in a civil partnership, adultery is not grounds to end the relationship, and the other difference is they have a different name. That's it. So how will this undermine marriage? Let's see.
I consider this legislation helps to ensure equality and safeguards human rights in Scotland. This bill follows a UK Supreme Court ruling from 2018 on the law of civil partnership in England and Wales. The court held that, as a result of the introduction of same-sex marriage in England and Wales, it was no longer compatible with the European Convention on Human Rights for access to civil partnership to be restricted exclusively to same-sex couples.
So the Supreme Court says this is some sort of rights violation, that civil partnerships are not available to heterosexual couples. How come they didn't jump on it when civil partnerships were introduced just for homosexual couples in the first place? It really makes you doubt the objectiveness of the legal system, doesn't it? It only seems to come into play to push things in the progressive direction. Now, I've sat through almost 2 hours of this debate in the Scottish Parliament. It was a pretty soul-destroying experience. As a sign of appreciation, you can maybe click like on this video now. But during this almost 2 hours of debate, I tried to count the number of times I heard an MSP say something original. And at the end of the debate, I had counted up to 0. They just stood up one after another, parroting the same lines. Equality, human rights, Equality Network says, Equality and Human Rights Commission says, Modern Scotland, blah, 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 blah. Now, just to illustrate the groupthink in the Scottish Parliament, let's hear from the Conservative Party's speaker on the matter.
I suspect we'll have many speeches which sound pretty much the same today, and that's fine. The bill is pretty uncontroversial. So we back the bill in aiming to extend civil partnerships to different sex couples to uphold human rights and equality of opportunity.
Someone really needs to report the Conservative Party for, I don't know, the Trade Descriptions Act, Advertising Standards Agency. I mean, in what way are they Conservatives? What do they conserve? If you don't protect and promote the vital institution of marriage, you've really got no right to call yourself a Conservative. But on we go with this Conservative, who's now going to get on to the key issue of adultery.
The bill also does not allow for adultery to be used as grounds for ending a civil partnership, unlike in marriage. So, presiding officer, if you were being mischievous about it, you could dub this bill a Love Cheats Charter, or rename it the Open Marriage Scotland Bill, if you were being mischievous. Frankly, most people except those of a liberal mind would see cheating as perfectly proper grounds to end any relationship.
Wait a minute, I hear you say. He's making a good point. This is a key feature of marriage, sexual exclusivity. It makes men behave the way that women want them to. The institution of marriage benefits women in that way. I made another video about that recently. This is one of the ways it creates a stable relationship. Now, I know the idea of sexual exclusivity, it's already left out of a lot of marriage ceremonies. They don't have the forsaking all others sort of line, particularly in humanist ceremonies where they have our love twinkles like the stars or whatever. But it's still there in the law that adultery is grounds for divorce. Now, in our society, people increasingly talk about open marriages, and that's what some people want. They want the legal rights of marriage without the responsibility. They still want to be able to sleep around. Now, if that's you, civil partnership is just what you've been waiting for. Now, that sends a message that the sexually exclusive nature is not really that important. The state endorses the relationship, gives it equal recognition, despite the fact that there isn't the promise of sexual exclusivity. Now, in fact, public commitments to sexual faithfulness is a vital element of the institution of marriage, so the Conservatives making a good point. But just listen to what comes next.
I'll take an intervention, yes.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Does he recognise, I'm grateful for the member giving way, does he recognise that the grounds of adultery in Scottish divorce is now seen as arcane, and actually unreasonable conduct is a far more catch-all reason for ending any kind of relationship, and that is typical of this bill trying to drag us into the 21st century when much of Scottish marital law is still stuck in the past?
So here's Alex Cole-Hamilton, Scotland's Justin Trudeau. So adultery is seen as an archaic and old-fashioned reason for divorce. Obviously, we've moved past that stage now, haven't we? I mean, really, he says unreasonable behaviour is enough. So he's effectively advocating for open marriage. Some couples might think it's unreasonable to have sex with other people. Some couples might not. It's up to them. So he's saying exclusivity sexually isn't inherent in the package of marriage. And the only point he seems to put forward is that it's the 21st century. Typical progressive. People used to think this. People now tend to say this. Therefore, that must be progress, so we must be right. Now, our Tory of the most determined description will strike back against this dangerous progressive liberal attack on the institution of marriage.
Graham Simpson.
I only mention it because it was mentioned in the committee's report. I'm not actually arguing for that. I was trying to be humorous, Mr. Cole-Hamilton, possibly failing on that occasion.
Oh, he was joking. Let's move on to another Conservative MSP.
Graham Simpson injected some humour of sorts, as well as some interesting legal commentary.
That's Maurice Golden, another Conservative MSP. Maurice, do you really think it's appropriate for you to be making light of unfaithfulness in marriage? But they're diluting a key element of marriage. They're providing the option of opting out of faithfulness, as though society doesn't really care about that anymore. So with a civil partnership, you get all the rights of marriage, but without the responsibility. Whereas marriage is a package deal, and that's what makes it so strong. So by providing civil partnerships for heterosexual couples, they're diluting marriage. That's undermining the institution. Now, to give an analogy there, imagine some people said, we want temporary marriage. We want the legal rights, but we don't have to commit for a whole life. We want it to just be, say, for 10 years, then we'll renew it for every year after then. So call it whatever you like. Some people might choose that. People would say, that doesn't undermine marriage. The fact that some people choose something different, that doesn't undermine marriage. Marriage is still there for people who want that. But if you give people inferior choices, you're weakening the culture of expectation of lifelong exclusive commitment that's embodied in marriage. So marriage is not about giving people more choice. Marriage is actually about restricting people's choice, and that's a good thing. The sort of choices it restricts are running off and abandoning your family, for example. Now, there's a little curiosity with adultery with this. In same-sex marriage, adultery is grounds for divorce, but the adultery has to be heterosexual. So two gay men in a marriage, if one of them has sex with another man, that's not adultery. If he has sex with a woman, that is, and it's grounds for divorce. Now we have the Supreme Court jumping in, equality, everything's got to be entirely symmetrical, but obviously they don't think it matters here. It was clear what's happened. People actually don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of trying to define homosexual intercourse, which is fair enough. I will now move on to the next issue, which is some people don't like the name marriage because it's got baggage.
Young LGBT people would no longer live in fear of being outed as gay, lesbian or bisexual if they revealed they were in a civil partnership. And transgender civil partners seeking a gender recognition certificate would no longer need to end their relationship.
I mean, that's just bizarre. I mean, can you imagine two gay men have entered into a civil partnership, but they don't want people to know they're gay? And then the other point, changing sex and staying in your civil partnership. That's the sort of concern that drives the Scottish Parliament. It's a parallel universe. Our concern, stable families, kids brought up by mum and dad wherever possible. But the Scottish Parliament, not remotely interested in that.
A key reason raised by many women and some men who objected to marriage was that it had, in their view, patriarchal and religious baggage. They welcomed civil partnership as an alternative institution, representing a more equal commitment, one which allows couples to imprint their own values and beliefs.
Here we go again, patriarchal, male-dominated society. I mean, watching the Scottish Parliament is like watching a gender studies seminar in some university. But the fact is that marriage operates the way it does, particularly in a way that benefits women. Now, they're saying that marriage has got religious connotations. Well, yes, but religion is more or less a human universal. Every society through history has been religious to some degree. Marriage itself is a human universal. Every society ever investigated has some form of marriage. And marriage can be as secular as you like in any case.
Civil partnership matches our relationship as equal partners, neither of us above the other.
I mean, this is just nonsense. There's nothing in marriage inherently about leadership or headship or obeying. Okay, some people have views about that, but that's not inherent in the institution of marriage. I mean, by the same sort of argument, someone could say, I don't want to get married, because now that there's same-sex marriage, I feel like marriage is sort of tainted, so I don't want to be associated with it. I'd like you to come up with something new for me. I mean, how far would that line get? That would be laughed out of court at the first opportunity, wouldn't it? Laughed out of Parliament, should I say. But this argument that's been put forward is equally weak.
You see, Presiding Officer, for many mixed-sex couples, the choice of either marriage or cohabitation is not real choice. Rather, it's a decision between acting against their own deeply held convictions or accepting a lesser legal position.
So there are people with a deeply held conviction that they don't want to get married, but do want a civil partnership because it's called something different. And these people are driving policy in the Scottish Parliament. This anti-marriage sentiment is dominating the debate. Whereas the pro-marriage argument, completely absent.
It offers legal and financial protection for both parties in the event of a relationship ending, but it also does so much more in terms of freeing them from this religious connotations of marriage that many, or the baggage that many attach to marriage.
Again, that's presented as though it's a perfectly common and reasonable view, but the Scottish Parliament, as I said, is just a parallel universe. Religious connotations, humanist weddings are hugely popular. But if you listen to the MSPs, they're giving these objections to marriage real weight, taking them very seriously, and they're promoting them, to be honest, often in a way that sounds like they're pretty sympathetic to them as well.
I know couples who see marriage as a religious institution they cannot identify with. I know people who associate the institution with personal trauma from their early years or marriages they were in before. Some object to its patriarchal tradition in which women are given away by their fathers.
Okay, what about the person who has childhood trauma in a marriage and then has a bad civil partnership? What do they want next? They're going to want a new name for the next thing? A couple contract? A spousal covenant? Well, let's see what happens. You heard it here first. The idea of giving away the bride? Well, the idea is that the father looked after, cared for, provided and protected for the girl, and then the husband takes over that role. And to be honest, I think a lot of women quite like that idea. But if they don't, fine. Then just don't have that aspect of the marriage ceremony.
We also believe that any kind of hierarchy in relationships is false, unhelpful, and can be stigmatizing. People should be able to choose the form of relationship recognition best suited to them, whether that be cohabitation, marriage, civil partnerships, either fully civil or with some kind of religious element. And if they choose what's best for them, it's not for anyone else to portray it as lesser.
So we're on to the last issue here, cohabitation and marriage. People should be free to choose. Of course they should be free to choose. Does that mean that all these forms of relationship are equal? Well, the statistics don't indicate that. Marriages are far more stable. They tend to lead to better outcomes for kids on virtually everything you can measure. Better for adults, better for society, better for the taxpayer, better for the environment. I guess he's not too bothered about that. He is a green MSP. After all, people in marriages tend to have more kids and less abortions than cohabiting couples. But he doesn't care about any of those things. None of them care about any of those things. In fact, it's a matter of principle for them not to care about things. They have a duty to not bring these issues into the discussion because they have a higher calling. And their higher calling is being liberal and non-judgmental. I mean, they might say it's not for the government to try and influence people in these areas. But hang on a minute, the government tries to influence people in every possible way. what they eat, how they exercise, how they get around, how they bring up their kids. They want the mums to all be at work. They want more boys trained to be beauticians, etc., etc. The government makes it its duty to influence people's behaviour in every way you can imagine, apart from this one that's really important, and promoting marriage is anathema.
It relates to a much more fundamental issue, and that is the emotional benefit of a stable family environment.
Well, this is going well. He's the only MSP to even touch this sort of topic.
However structured, and there are many, many different ways in which it can be structured and operate, and it's not for me to comment on anyone else's arrangement.
But then it lapses straight back into the groupthink. All forms of relationship are equal, completely ignoring the evidence.
It doesn't address the legal chasm between those who enter into a formally recognised marriage or civil partnership and those who choose to cohabit. As mentioned before, cohabitees have weaker and less certain rights than those in a civil partnership or marriage, a difference which is particularly gendered and particularly experienced by women. And as the long-term trend towards cohabitation and diversifying family types continues to develop, this bill mustn't be seen as signifying the end of the road for creating legal equality in all types of relationships in Scotland.
Wow, this is a grave injustice, isn't it? People who decide not to get married don't have the legal protections of marriage. How unfair is that, she says. So if cohabitees must be equally protected by the law because of equality and human rights and whatever, in other words, that's like saying marriage must mean nothing. And she admits that marriage protects women in particular, so you might think she'd want to promote it, encourage it in some sort of way. Not at all. She wants to dissolve it so that you have the same rights whether you're married or not. And if that's not undermining marriage and making it seem pointless, I don't know what is.
Finally, many people considered the bill should have addressed converting a marriage to a civil partnership. In light of all I've said today, I would like to read Mr B and Miss L's views. A couple who married only to protect their financial position with advancing age. The bill, as introduced, would create an inequality of opportunity among would-be civil partners, between those who have not married and those who, for whatever reason, have. This seems to conflict with the Scottish Government's laudable aim of societal equality and respect in Scotland. Presiding Officer, the committee supports the principle that for those who wish, it should be possible to convert a marriage to a civil partnership.
So they want to give married people the option of opting out of marriage into civil partnership. Remember, this doesn't undermine marriage at all. For example, if they wanted an open relationship. So it's a case of if you want to opt out of marriage, but keep the legal advantages. And it legitimizes the view that there's something wrong with marriage. There's something so wrong with it, the government needs to provide an escape route so that people can have all the same rights, basically, but just without the name marriage. And all the MSPs completely agree.
Even when civil partnerships were first proposed in the UK, Patrick Harvey's proposed Members' Bill in 2003 would have created it on a non-discriminatory basis, open to mixed-sex couples from the outset.
That just confirms my theory. The Greens lead the way. The SNP, Lib Dems and Labour come along saying the same things a couple of years later, and then before too long the Conservatives are totally on board as well, and this is the latest example of that phenomenon in action. So in conclusion, civil partnerships for heterosexual couples undermine and relativise marriage, the most foundational institution in any society. Not a single MSP got to their feet to defend marriage, let alone to promote it. The impression given by this debate is that marriage is really unpopular. There's a surge of demand for an alternative. And the insinuation is that the charge that marriage somehow endorses patriarchal oppression is a valid objection. And also, introducing civil partnerships in this way can be seen as a national endorsement of open relationships. Now, this process from same-sex civil partnerships, same-sex marriage, now to mixed-sex civil partnerships, this process has served to undermine the clarity, status and power of the institution of marriage to act as a foundation of a healthy society. Now, you can see the desperate need to put Scottish Family Party MSPs into the Parliament. We will be bringing a completely new dimension to the debate with our pro-marriage message. This debate just shows the ignorance of the truth among the MSPs, and the people of Scotland will pay a price for that in the longer term. So you need to support the Scottish Family Party to enable us to fulfill this vital mission. There's a link below where you can join us right now. Do like and share this video. At the end there'll be some links to other videos we've made about marriage. And thanks for watching.